Hello, and welcome back to Michelle and Mickey's Performance Playbook. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hey, Mickey. I'm all right. How are you?
Good, good. Well, we were going to chat about some season planning, but I think you have an interesting story, a recent story from a swim meet that I thought you could kick it off, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody knows by now probably I'm coaching high school swimming. We had a big meet this past weekend, and it was a special kind of meet. Well, so I guess I should go back and start and be like, high school swimming here is unique in a way that in that we have meets pretty much every weekend for like 12 or 13 weeks in a row. So like every
That's a
single
lot. Yeah.
Saturday, or, yeah, it is. And it feels like too much for me. Like it felt initially, I was like, that's a lot, to be asking the
Hmm.
kids to be like performing at their top level every single week. It felt like a lot, but also because I've been around a lot, like I can sort of differentiate you. Like here's a big meet, and then that's like kind of normal standard meet or whatever. So like even in that frame, like I feel like I could meter my excitement for different meets
Hmm.
accordingly. And I would have thought that this would have been like a big one, right? So like this one was like it was an invitational style meet. It was at a local private school, Punahou, for those like anybody who knows like Hawaii,
Oh,
like
yeah, I
Punahou. That
remember.
was a school
Hmm.
like Barack Obama went
Yeah.
to. So it's like really nice facility. It's like so the pool that usually the public school kids swim at is just like a regular single 8 lane pool. So there's no warm up and cool down opportunity, which isn't ideal, right? Like if you're like trying to
Hmm.
like race short events and you're accumulating lactate and then you go sit for 20 minutes and then you go and dive
Yeah.
off the blocks and try to go max again, like without having cool down. I feel like normally it's not a great setup, but this meet was like potentially a great setup. Like this beautiful, like probably the nicest facility in Hawaii or the nicest one I've been to. It's a 10 lane competition pool. On the other end, there's a diving well with another pool that
Hmm.
they can use for warm up and cool down. There's so much energy like in the pool area because there's like 280 swimmers or something like that, and
Wow.
like lots of their family and all of the coaches and all the officials, and and there were a lot of really fast kids that were there.
Hmm.
And so like most I feel like most of our kids were like they were really pumped at this opportunity to get to swim at this pool, and that's
Hmm.
something that I work on with the kids a lot is like have to versus get to, and like we get to do this,
Right.
and this is a cool opportunity, and like here's your chance to swim really fast. And so like most of our kids were like if they are competitive swimmers who have like the special tech suits, they call it like suiting up. So like for
Hmm.
some meets they'll suit up, meaning they'll put on like their super fast like whatever suit. And so like most of our kids were suited up, like they were ready to go. And in the first half of the meet, they were swimming really well. Like there were kids who had been like on the bubble of making a state qualifying, time, but had missed it before by like just a little bit. And at this meet, they were crushing it. It was just like
Nice.
event after
Yeah.
event, like where they're like state qualifying, state qualifying, state qualifying. And I was like super pumped, like this is great. And if you like so that was like my mindset, and the mindset that I'm like trying
Hmm.
to give to my kids is like this is a great opportunity and this is cool. On the other side of that, on the negative side, it was Friday night at the end of like Christmas break, or like winter
Right.
break
Right.
is
Going
happening
into,
now,
yeah.
right? Like yeah, it's December 20th. So like these kids have like just finished their exams. It has been raining absolutely nonstop for at least a week here. We had this like really weird
Really?
weather pattern that just like landed on our island, and it did nothing but rain. Like the marathon was like horrible and rainy and
Really?
windy and all that. Yeah. Um, and so it was piss pouring rain, right? And so it's also like the meet started at 5 p.m. And, with that many kids, like it's seated to go until 10 p.m. This is like a
Oof,
late
that's
night. But
late.
I'm also
Late.
like, look, you know what? Like, I'm old lady that
Kids
goes to
stay
bed
up.
at like 8:30. Like, if I can be up at this, like, these kids are like, they want to be out till 10 or 11. So, like, come on, don't give me that. That, like,
Yeah.
you're 15, like, you love being out till 10 p.m. So, I don't know. I feel like don't use that. I'm the one that should have an excuse for that, not them.
Yeah.
But like, if you take all this into context, that like, they're probably tired at the end of the week. It's really dark out because it's late on a Friday night. It's piss pouring rain. So a lot of them are, they're kind of complaining that they're cold. Even though it wasn't really cold, but if you were wet, maybe it would have been. Um, but anyway, so we got to like the girls' 100 free, and there's thunder, and
Mm.
the officials had to like they didn't want to call the meet, but they called like a 20-minute break, and they said everybody out of the pool, like go go into the stands, get off the pool deck. We're gonna wait for 20 minutes. We don't see any more thunder and lightning, and we'll start again. And so like I've got girls that are like they're on the bubble of making state qualifying for the 100, and they're suited up and they're ready to go. And like, they're 3/10 off and like, this is their chance. They get to do it. And then, and they're super disappointed, right? Because like they're ready to swim and you're like, and now take a break. And I could see the look on like one of my swimmers' faces.
Yeah,
Like
it's
she was
hard.
like, oh my gosh, so disappointed. And I'm like, just relax. I'm like teaching her to breathe and like, you got this. Just, go visualize. You have 20 more minutes to visualize your race. You have a couple of heats. Once we get started again, before you're going to go, you can warm up again. You'll be fine. So anyway, they bring the meet back 20 minutes later. They run another heat of the girls 100 free. And I'm like not paying a lot of attention to the weather because it's like, I don't know, there's just other things for me to pay attention to. But at one point, I'm standing like near my team while this first heat of the girls is going back. And the team next to us, they all like started cheering like mad. I mean, and it was like they were pointing at the sky and they were like, yeah. I mean, it was like you would have thought that like their favorite team was like winning the Super Bowl. Like that, like that's the degree that they were cheering. Like they were jumping up and down and they were yelling for
Wow.
something. And I was
Yeah.
like, what's happening? Right? Like something really exciting is happening because this team is going off the rails cheering. And then I realized that what they're cheering for is that they saw lightning. And so in their
Oh, and
mind,
so
they
it's,
were like,
yeah,
we don't
gonna
have
get.
to do this anymore. Like, we get to go
Hmm.
home because it's lightning. And they were like so excited about that. And so I kind of cut the story short. Like, they did end up at that point calling the meet and saying, we'll come back tomorrow and finish the rest of the events, for any of the kids who can. That led to a giant cluster because, like, most of the kids
Yeah.
weren't prepared to swim the next day. Mostly it's like they already had plans. Like some of them are traveling for Christmas break, or
Travel.
some of them had already scheduled other things, like to do if
Hmm.
they're not full time swimmers, right? Like so. Anyway, it was a logistical mess. But I was driving home that night, and for me, I was like, I have been swimming for 43 years. And never once in 43 years of swimming have I been happy about being kicked out of the pool due to thunder or lightning.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
never. And it's happened at a couple of triathlons that I've been to, like where like the swim
Hmm.
got canceled because of thunder or lightning or whatever. And like, and always then I was super disappointed. And I thought, like, so I'm driving home and it's occurring to me because I was so surprised that like that's a mindset you could have, that somebody could have,
Yeah.
to be happy about not getting to race, or in their mind not having to race. And in my mind I'm like,
Right.
you don't get to race, and they're like, we don't have to race. And like, that's a totally different mindset here. And then the conclusion that I came to is like, those kids are over raced, right? Like, if you are at this beautiful facility, like with
Yeah. And you
this
don't want to
opportunity that you have to
swim.
potentially get like, one of your best times ever, if not your absolute best time ever. Like some kids were setting lifetime PRs that night. And so I'm like, if you're here and you don't want to do that, it's really a sign that
Yeah.
you're overtired, you're overtrained, you're over raced. Like you really
Hmm.
need to be resting more or have like fewer opportunities to race. And so as I was driving home in like the piss pouring rain, I was thinking, I bet if these kids had like 3 meets per year,
That'd be different.
they would be like salivating, like this is my chance, like I finally get to do it. And like maybe they would put too much pressure on themselves and like crack, which can happen, right? Like if so, like the negative thing about only racing a couple times is that you're like, I have one chance to do this, or like, like that kind
Hmm.
of feeling can be overwhelming with pressure to the point where like you don't end up performing your best. But
Hmm.
yeah, I don't, I mean, I was just like, we're doing it wrong here with these kids. Like
Yeah.
if
With
they
those kids. Yeah.
are celebrating and
Yeah.
cheering. And so it really made me contemplate a lot about like, is the optimal, like if you're looking for your best performance, what is the optimal amount of opportunities you should have to achieve that, right? Like in a season, and it probably should be more than one, because if there's only one, then like maybe the pressure or the tension,
Right.
is too much if you're not used to handling that. But every single weekend, likely too much, right? And then these kids demonstrated that it was too much because they're cheering that like we get to go home and we don't have to do this anymore. And so yeah,
Yeah.
it really just got me thinking about like arranging an ideal season that's ideal for an athlete to get the most out of themselves. Like what does that actually look like? And while it can be different for different athletes, and then of course the ones that we work with, they're way more in charge of that, right? So like these high school kids, they're
Yeah,
not
they're
really in
not
charge of
right.
anything. Like, right? Like they show up to our program and it's up to the adults who are in charge to pick when and where the meets are. And so like the adults are
Hmm.
obviously like doing something wrong in my opinion in scheduling a meet every single weekend if the kids don't actually want to be there. Right? Like
Yeah,
we're doing a
yeah.
disservice to these kids by like forcing a meet every
Hmm.
weekend. That would be my feedback to like the adults in charge of this league. But then like with athletes that you and I work with, when they get to choose their races, then like what is the ideal amount to try to do in a season that's like enough that you're not putting mega pressure on that one race that like you have to perform that one day versus like
Hmm.
racing so much that like ho hum, I don't care, I don't really want to do this, like I'm not excited for this, or I'm too tired, I've been doing this every single week.
Right, right. Yeah,
Obviously like
yeah.
it's just not ideal that way either.
Right.
I don't know, what do you
And this is
think?
the perfect time. Well, yeah, I think this is the perfect time to chat about it, and maybe provide some guidance for people listening, because I have had a slew of emails, right, and conversations around like next season, right, and what they're thinking about and wanting my feedback on, well, could I do this race and then that race, and then what if I do this, and all these ins and outs, and so yeah, I mean, for the folks that we work with, right, well, there's a couple of things. I mean, one, I have athletes that their opportunities to race are also have to fit within like their kids' schedules. Like, for example, one of my athletes was like, I really would like to do this X race with my friend who is also thinking about it, but it's so and so's graduation that weekend. And so can't do that race, right? And so, or for other people it's like, well, I know my work schedule is going to be crazy, I've got travel, you're going to take 2 months, right, to do international travel for work. It's probably not ideal to then choose to do an Ironman, you know a month after that, right? Unless you've prepared and we're in a good mindset to be able to weather that storm. So much, I think, for the athletes we work with. I mean, maybe not everyone, maybe some of the athletes you work with are, I don't really have anyone that can just pick and choose, that I'm working with currently, that can just pick and choose their races at will, and because either finances are that good or their life is so open that they really have that opportunity. But so
I
yeah, it's
have a
often
few.
like
The ones
working.
the
You
ones
have
that
a
are
few
older whose kids are like not around
done,
anymore,
right,
or like or
right.
they don't have kids or their kids are like grown and out of the house that they're like
They
not a
can,
consideration. I do feel like
right,
there's a lot of those that are like they could pick and go to a race kind of whenever they wanted.
yeah,
I do have a few.
yeah. I guess I have one, but then that's often, well, and then she's dealing with a very ill mother, who's just not doing well, and so there's kind of this like, well, I might have to pick up everything and travel to go take care of her, to go, I mean, at risk of potentially passing, and then they've got grandkids that it's like,
Yeah.
well, I try to do that, but then I've got to coordinate, because that I think they're going to go on vacation and I have to watch the grandkids, and it's always this like delicate, trying to figure out when is good, like the meeting time, the meeting events, when it's good. But ultimately, I have had experiences. So for example, I raced very little, when I was racing well, with the one exception. One year, I decided to do 3 Ironman in 3 months, and that was a conscious decision to test the boundaries of what I could handle in terms of like perform recover. But everything else was, I didn't do a lot of prep races. I mean, once I learned how to do triathlon, I didn't feel like I needed to race, and for me, I preferred to be at home with my dogs training than racing. But I know you had mentioned that you tended to maybe want to race more, and race, because the community and it's fun. And not to say I've done that as well. I've used races for true builds, like, oh, this would be a great time to do a half marathon. I'm going to jump in and do a
Yeah.
half as part of my, a supported half marathon, right, as part of my long run training. So I've kind of done it both ways. And I've also had athletes that race a lot and that don't race as much. Mindset, I think, is the biggest thing that we have to navigate around for my athletes that race a lot. For my athletes that don't race a lot, we do maybe a little bit more prep work for that in the pre-race, like, because they're a little bit maybe rusty, right? So we have to talk through some stuff, and if I had a totally new athlete, I would say, let's dabble in some like low risk, right? Like, get your feet wet, have fun races. But for my athletes that have raced a lot in the past, and we're talking like every other weekend, with like there are some opportunities in the Boulder area to do like a stroke, what's called stroke and stride. So you're
Yeah,
going
yeah,
out and doing like hard swims, hard runs, right? Like there's whatever, they're doing that every week. By the end of the season, I do see excessive
yeah,
fatigue and I see
yeah,
a stagnation really of that style of it's challenging, but
yeah. I think that like in an ideal world, so if we're talking about season planning,
mhm,
in the ideal world and like what you would read in the back of a book or like
right.
your high level coaches that are trying to get you to like really peak and have like your absolute best performance. I do believe that the way to do that is to be very selective, picky, choosy about the race that you're going to plan to do. And you're going to give yourself like at least 8 or 9 months,
Yep.
of like
Yeah.
prep time, leading up to that race, if not years. Like ideally, it would
Yeah.
be like,
Yeah.
year on year is like that's how you're going to get the most out of yourself. I think that that is, in my opinion, that's the best way to
Hmm.
have like your best race would be to like plan
Absolutely.
it out in months ahead of time, give your coach like plenty of time, give yourself plenty of time to do like all of the training at the right time. And so if we were looking
Hmm.
at sort of like the periodization of like what would training look like in different blocks like leading up to that kind of thing, that can be really really fun for a coach to like help an athlete
Yeah.
navigate through. And I think that when we're like learning how to be coaches and we're like studying about how to be coaches and we learn about all this like training theory and the periodization and all of that, like you have all these grand plans of like this is how we're going to
We're in a
manage
structure.
this athlete, right? And we're going to structure it all like this. And then like, okay, so this, I'm going into my 18th year of coaching, and I'm like, it's so rare that it ever works
No.
out
Yeah.
that way. You know what I mean? Like it's just like for and it's likely because like we work with amateur athletes who have lives, right? Like so if I was working with a professional who had nothing else to
Yeah.
do in their life, right? And like this was the only thing, hey, they probably would hire a coach that's worked with professionals before. Like probably not us. But like I think I could do that. I feel like I could do that. It just
Hmm.
but it would be very different from like what I'm doing every day working with athletes
Hmm.
that have full-time jobs and kids and spouses
Hmm.
and a life and
Yeah.
parties that they wanted to go to for the holidays and like pick the thing, right? A boss that's demanding and work travel, and then they got sick and then they got injured, and like there's so many life things that get in the way of that like perfect plan. That so like given that, the rest of this conversation can largely be around like how do we do season planning in the real world.
In the real world. Yep. I totally agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah. I think, so, and I feel, and this is maybe I'm misremembering because I'm not 18. I don't know how many years. I'm probably at 16, maybe 15. I don't know. Coaching the, so you've got a couple years on me, but I think that in my experience, in the last few years at least, I feel like, and so I don't have hard data. I'd have to go back into my training. Well, and of course, when athletes leave, I'm not connected to them, so I can't see what we were doing at that time. I feel like there are athletes come in now with much shorter time periods. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's my perception or my bias. I feel like back when I started coaching, even through like mid years of coaching, people would like kind of come in and be like, I have a couple A races, right? To be honest, it was mostly Ironman. Like I have two Ironmans I'd like to do, or I have one Ironman and I'd like to do well at these other two 70.3s or, whatever. And now I feel like I'm getting a little bit either short, like it's just shorter builds. It's like, yeah, I'd like to do this race in like 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, oh, have you been training? And it's kind of like, it's kind of, sort of, maybe. And then I go and look at the training peaks and it's, some hit workouts and most people are doing some stuff, right? But there is, for the endurance events, like we need to do aerobic base building, right? Like we need to have some longer rides and we need to have time to do some longer rides. So I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if it's maybe the athletes I'm working with now, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit less notice of when I want to do something. I feel like I'm also getting a little bit more like I just want to jump into things, which is fine. Like this is also sort of a stage of life, right? Like their evolution, because I also work with athletes that have been doing this for a long time, 20
Yeah.
years. And so they're sort of And I think that plays into the season planning as well because they've kind of done a lot and they've done a lot of the races they want to do. And so mostly what we're trying to do is just stay fit so that they can then maybe decide in 2 or 3 months to go then do a 70.3.
So
Ironman, I
I
still
feel like
kind of
I have a
require a little
lot
bit
of
more.
that.
You have those?
Like
Yeah.
that athlete that you just described is like I feel like I have a lot of that.
Yeah.
The mentality is largely along the lines of like I want to stay fit enough and like close enough that like when something
Hmm.
comes up, I can decide with a degree of confidence that like I can jump in, and
Hmm.
then we might only have 6 or 8 weeks, but we just like tweak the plan then to like
Right.
focus on that one thing. So like largely my objective for those athletes is to kind of keep their fitness as like deep and well rounded
Right.
as possible, like not
Yeah.
knowing what's coming up next. And so it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
so what I'm not doing is like a here's your full structured block of here's your
Hmm.
base building block that for 8 weeks like
Right.
this is we're going to focus on like low heart rate training with 30-second bursts and spurts to like stay in touch with the neuromuscular aspect. So like so just so what people know what we're talking, if I was to do like a aerobic base, like in an ideal world, we would spend a good amount of time, at least 8 weeks or so, putting in absolutely as much volume as we could with your heart rate pretty low. So you're going what feels slow to you, but because it's easy, you can do a lot of it. And it's building this really, really solid base. And you might add
Hmm.
some like strength work in there. You might add some like short, like 30-second strides or 30-second spin ups and
Hmm.
bursts of power on the bike and like 25 sprint in the pool, just like stay in touch with the neuromuscular aspect of things. But the focus is largely on building a really solid foundation, and then
Hmm.
from there, going into key workouts a couple times a week that are looking at raising your threshold or going like above threshold or working on VO2 max, like that kind of thing, where you're going to go for, 6 or 8 weeks where I'm really focused on not every session, of course, but, 2 or 3 times a week where you're doing some short, hard efforts that are maybe sort of 1 to 8 minutes on
Hmm.
repeat of, depending on the athlete, different ways of like raise the ceiling. And then in the last 8 weeks leading into your race, we would be like, all right, let's get specific. What is the race that's coming up? And we're going to work on like what exact pace and power do we expect you to be able to hold, for that race. And then we're going to dial it in for longer intervals, targeting, that heart rate, that race pace, that race power, like that kind of thing. And that's so what's changing is what the key workouts look like. And then how much total endurance work are we doing, and like that's what I would that like in the ideal world, if you gave me like I
Right.
have one race
It's
and
beautiful.
it's
Yeah.
and it's like 6 months from now, right, like that's like how I would do it. But
Right. But
that's
in the real,
not what we're
yeah.
actually doing with like the vast majority of our athletes. And so then it's like, well, then as coaches, how do we manage,
Yeah.
right? Like, so if we're
What
not
I'm,
doing that because it doesn't fit with what athletes life
right.
allows or their mentality even allows.
Right. And what I'm seeing over the year, like the last several years, again, no hard data on this, but let's be real. So aerobic base building, again, like it is the bread and butter. And if people are sort of like, well, I'm not sure, and and time limited, right? So, and I'm not one to buy into the like, you can substitute intensity for aerobic base building. I just, to a certain extent, right? Like, yes, it's not like a on off switch and there's like a gradation, but for the most part, yeah, like if you want to do Ironman, you want to do it well, like you got to spend some time in the right effort zones, whatever you want to call it. What I've been but a few things, right? Unclear like when they would race and what the goals might be, so there's that. Then there's also usually a combined issue of limited time, which is like I'm also not really, I don't know what race I want to do because I'm also really stressed about work and I'm really limited, and I really, so you've got like shorter and shorter blocks of time to work with the athlete. And then the third issue is like a lot of the aerobic base building is boring. And so they're like, I don't want to sit on the trainer and just do an hour easy, right? So as a coach, I'm like, well, we have to take into consideration the mindset and what is fun. We do this for fun. We're not getting paid. So what I've been doing, right, for these athletes is like you said, like trying to keep them well rounded, but I also know this as a coach is if I think I'm eroding their aerobic base. Like if they do want
Yeah.
to jump into Ironman, because we're doing a lot of fun stuff on the trainer, we're doing some sweet spot, we're doing some VO2, we're doing right, like things that are great and fun and they enjoy them. So that's
Hmm.
key, but in terms of like then going back into longer stuff, I'm like, okay, well, we haven't spent the time to do what we need to do here. And so I take that, and I talk about this openly with my athletes, and it's sort of this trade-off, like, okay, right, like we know that if we do this for too long, and for some of my athletes it's been years now, I'm like, well, if Ironman does come back onto the bucket list, right, in the next year, we're going to need a longer lead time. It doesn't mean you can't do Ironman. It just means, in 5 years ago, you may have only needed 6 months or maybe even 4 months, right? They were so fit because they spent years doing big aerobic base. But now it's like we've kind of delved into this more tempo-y, right? Like fun. It's fun. That's why a lot of people do it, right? It feels good.
Well, and
It
it
doesn't,
feels more like you're accomplishing something.
right,
Like if you finish a
right,
workout and
right.
you're not tired after, the mentality is that like I
Oh, I
didn't
didn't
really
do
accomplish
anything.
anything like in that. And I get that.
Right,
And I think there may be
right,
even like some truth to that depending on how much of it total work you're doing. Because like
right, right,
largely if you're only going to be training 6 hours a week total,
right.
then like
Yeah,
I don't know if like doing all of that easy actually
it's
builds
true.
much of your aerobic
It's
base
true.
anyway, right?
Yeah,
Like
it's
the
true.
total volume of
Yeah,
that isn't enough to
right.
accomplish
Raise
what we're
your,
trying to accomplish anyway. And so it's like
yeah.
the
So
value.
then,
I mean, if
yeah,
I go back and think about like 4 and 5 hour bike rides that are like the low heart rate endurance that are just absolutely like that's critical to Ironman success. The discipline and motivation that is required to do that properly, if you don't actually have an Ironman that you care about on your schedule, like staring you at the face, like I don't. There's so few athletes that have the motivation and the discipline to do that properly without,
yeah, it's true.
even when Ironman is on their schedule. It's
It's
a
true.
big
Yeah.
ask,
I mean,
right? But if Ironman's not on your schedule, the chances of someone like adhering to that and then staying with the sport are like zero. I think like maybe
yeah,
1 in 1,000.
you and I
People.
probably,
Yeah,
like the lifers.
even no, but even me, like the max I will ride now is like maybe 4 hours, and even then, like that would be a group ride, and it would have efforts, right? Like
Right, right.
I haven't done a 3 or 4 hour ride all in like at a low
Zone
heart
two.
rate. Like
Yeah.
I do enough low heart rate stuff, I think in total, but I
Hmm.
don't go out and just ride easy. But I also don't have an Ironman on my schedule, so
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. But I think if you did, right, like you would do it because you understand the benefits, right? And I think
if
I'm
I
in the same
did,
boat.
I
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And here's the thing: the reason that I don't is because I don't want to do that kind of training.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I'm
Because
in
it's like
this
I
kind of the
know
same boat. Yeah.
exactly what it would take to
Right.
like to put together a good Ironman. Like I
Yeah.
know what it is. I know what it would take, and
And
I don't want to
yeah.
do that. At least not right now. Like maybe in a couple more years, like I'll decide that I want to. But like right now, I don't want to. So I'm like, well, then that it makes the
Yeah. Well,
decision really easy. But I
yeah, I'm
also
in the
know
same
like
boat.
what how an Ironman goes. If you don't do that, I
Yeah.
know how the Ironman goes, and I'm like, well, then that's not
Yeah.
worth it either. So like the only way to do an Ironman is if you're willing to do that kind of training, and if you're
Hmm.
not, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're just trying to like finish your first Ironman as a like check bucket list. I
Right.
did it.
Right.
Great.
Right.
Great.
Right. Yep. I absolutely agree. Yeah. So let's say like and a lot of my athletes are 70.3 focused. I don't even know if I'm going to have anyone jump into Ironman this year. I maybe I'm not sure. So in your opinion, what is your like, so let's just say, well, it's so hard to like frame this around, because there's ideal, right? There's like, okay, if you
Yeah.
have a 70.3, let's say, like what would you, like what should someone look at? Should they do a preparation? Should they not? I'm trying to think of like how we can help our listeners here when they are thinking about um, choosing a race, right? Like after it, so first consideration is like, does it work with your finances and your, can you afford it, right? That's always probably one. Timing, right? Like, does it work with your life schedule, whatever that looks like, and that does include like the build, like, can you set aside time to dedicate towards this if you care about it, right? Like some people want to jump into a 70.3 and it really is for fun, it's with friends, and then that's a different situation. So I think we have to, and both are fine. There's no right or wrong. I mean, yeah, our job as coaches is to help people get to the start line healthy and ready to achieve their process driven goals, as well as their, more, uh, what's the other,
The
outcome
outcome.
oriented, thank you, oriented goals. So yeah, I usually, so for example, if I have an athlete training for a 70.3, it depends again, like it depends on how many 70.3s they've done. A lot of athletes I work with, spent 20 years in the sport. So do they need a prep race? No. I always say, like, if it's something you're comfortable with and you want to do one, make it a low stress prep race. Like you don't have to travel for it. You
Yeah.
ideally it's in the time frame like you can like drive to it in the morning. It's very low effort, right? To make that happen because I almost find the athletes now, like with the travel, it's a lot. It's not even the race itself that fatigues them. It's everything else leading up to it. Even if it's a C, a C race, right? It's the setting aside the time, taking time off of work, and it's like it's not worth it, right? Just it's not worth it. We can do some visualization and run through the mechanics of the transitions if and and call it good.
Yeah, I
How
think
do
you're
you
right about that.
yeah,
The key is like having local races and enough local races
right.
that are like timed, or enough local races you can choose from that you can like time one that makes sense, like with
Hmm.
your 70.3. So I would say, like, locally here, I feel like we're in a pretty good spot because for a lot of athletes that are local here to Oahu, like the Hawaii 70.3 at the end of May tends to be like a big A race that a lot of people like, they start training for in January and they're focused on that one race. But then we have a ton of like little races starting in February, like February, March, and
Hmm.
April. There's tons of races, and those can be like, there's like run swim races, and there's short sprint
Hmm.
triathlons, and there's the Honolulu Triathlon, which is like an Olympic distance race. Hon-Tri tends to be 2 or 3 weeks out from three, and I've found that to be just ideal. Like so, and I
Hmm.
like it personally when it's 2 weeks out, right? So because what that allows for is like you have like this whole long build. Maybe we break it up with like a sprint race sometime in March or April, right? Just to because it's fun and it's a nice like progress check, and it's
Hmm.
like for some athletes, if they like racing, it's motivating.
Hmm.
You can practice some things. Okay, super. And then if you're going into the 70.3, like 3 weeks out can be like a really big weekend. This is
Hmm.
what I like. I like 3 weeks out to be like, that was hard, right? Like,
Hmm.
I made it. I got through that like really solid, hard, long, specific kind of training day. And then if you go into like an Olympic distance race 2 weeks out with a little
Hmm.
bit of rest in and out, right? So like maybe
Hmm.
like 2 days before, 2 days after. So it's just like a 5 day sort of, like block of resting in and out of an Olympic distance race that is going to be like a really solid threshold effort for 2 and a half hours, depending on the,
Hmm.
the athlete. And then from there, it's like everything is like quite polarized, at least in my plans. Like, so from in the last 2 weeks, you'll still have a couple of key workouts, like maybe two per week that are like, here's some quality stuff where we're working,
Hmm.
but they're more like 70.3 paced intervals, which isn't really that hard for like 8 to 10 minutes at a time, maybe 12 minutes. But, like you would have some key sessions that I would try to like put a leash and be like, don't run faster than this, even though you
Yeah.
could, right? Like,
Right. Right.
we've seen too the problem with like, I feel great and I just ran faster than I
Right.
planned, and then they left the race out on the training day. But I like that kind of setup going into the
That's nice. Yeah.
70.3. Like, I that feels perfect. But again, like, I wouldn't suggest that an athlete go find an Olympic distance race 2 weeks before that they had to travel to. That's more
Right.
like
Yeah.
just like you're sleeping in your own bed and you're driving down there
Right.
first thing in the morning, right, and racing
Yeah.
with your friends and then going home that afternoon.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So
that
that
feels
I
like
think
a
that much more manageable than the travel. And I've found that athletes just don't. It's not worth it, and it ends up being more of a fatigue hole than
mhm.
sometimes even the race itself, right? It's a yeah. I mean, some athletes travel very well and it's easy and low stress, but I would say the majority of people feel like that's too much. Even athletes that have to travel before races, for work or life or whatever, it's like it packs a punch.
I just had an athlete do that. Like, he was supposed to run the Honolulu Marathon, but his work travel, like, and it's interesting. Like, I think he doesn't have. I don't. It seems like, from my perspective, he doesn't have a ton of input into when he's going somewhere, and he doesn't have a lot
Yeah.
of like lead time. Like, or maybe he does, and he just doesn't tell me about it until the day before. But like, I think genuinely he doesn't always know when he has to travel, because he'll be like, "Oh, by the way, I got notice. Like, I'm going on." All next week, Monday through Thursday, I'm coming back. And sometimes that happens like literally, and then there's a race like that weekend, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's
Right.
so like not
So
ideal at
yeah.
all. And it happened to him before, the Honolulu Marathon where he went away for the 2 weeks before, and he's coming back on like the Friday. And I was
Like,
like,
oof.
oh my gosh, you know. And it's
Yeah.
one thing if you're like, maybe on the mainland it feels a little different because you can, in theory, travel where it's like 1 or 2 hour plane ride away. But like from us, you know,
Yeah.
the
It's
very bare minimum that you're traveling is like it's going to be at least 6 hours. Like no
right.
matter what direction you're going, you're on a
Right.
plane for 6 hours, you know, before you're
Right.
going to land on land again. So it's
Right.
like it is an ordeal, and it's like the stress that that is on a body. And he ended up not running the marathon, which
Yeah.
I didn't even know until I was like checking the marathon results that morning, you know, and I'm looking for his name
That's
and I'm
not
texting him. I'm like, hey, it's coming up that you're not racing. Are you not racing? And he's like, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't tell you I'm not racing. I was like, thanks for letting me know. But really
uh,
also like smart decision to
yeah,
not.
smart
He's like,
decision.
it just felt like too much, like after all that travel. I'm like, you're
Yeah.
right. It would have been too much. And then like in his mind, so he's a very experienced athlete. So the marathon was just going to be like, sure, why not? I'm here.
Hmm.
You know, I'm capable of running a marathon. I'll jump in and do it, which in my mind, I don't think is like the best reason ever to do a marathon. Like, just
Maybe
because it's
not.
here and
Yeah.
it's convenient. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but like it's largely though because I have a very high degree of respect for the marathon distance.
Mm.
And so when people just jump in under trained, which tons of people do, there's like, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 people that run a
Hmm.
Honolulu Marathon, and there's no time limit on it. So like tons of people are just out there walking, you know, like it's an 8 hour event for a
Yeah.
lot of people,
Fun.
like 6 to 8 hours is fine. But like, I don't know. I just feel like, why would you do that to yourself? And then you're just going to be tired after.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, so in my mind, it's like train specifically for the marathon, know what pace you think you can run, challenge yourself, do it, and try really hard. And then if you make it, great. And if you didn't, like, learn the lesson. But like afterward, you have to take recovery time. Like, so whether you ran like your best 3:15 marathon or like you jogged it in 5 hours, like either way, for 2 weeks after,
Hmm.
you're not training, you know. And that
Right.
was like
Right.
this athlete's thought process along the lines. He's like, because I was traveling, I didn't feel super. I knew that the marathon would just be mediocre, just getting through it, and that all it would do is set back my recovery time. And I like training, and I just wanted to be able to train, so I figured scrap it. So and I was like, I'd already written his recovery week, so I was like, all right, well, I'll go back then and rewrite this week, right? Because like now you don't need to recover this whole week because you didn't actually run a marathon. So like,
Hmm.
let me revise, which goes into the other thing we were going to talk about
Yeah.
like
That's a
why
perfect
don't
segue.
we plan out like months in advance the whole training cycle? Like, so, because if here's the
Mm.
thing, you could go if you're a triathlete, and I just talked to a potential new athlete this past week about this exact scenario. He was talking about like training for his first 70.3, and he's like trying to decide if I hire a coach, and like, why should I hire a coach versus just like do it on my own? And I'm like, here's the deal, you could totally, this, he's an athlete, I'm like, you could do it on your own, like you would, I promise you, given what you've told me, you could do it on your own. You would finish. You'd feel like reasonably proud of yourself, and it would be fine. And I'm like, if that's all you're going for, you definitely don't need me. And if you're competitive and if you think you're going to finish that race and like look at the guy next to you and be like, I think maybe I could have gotten him, you know, I could have beat him,
Hmm.
or I could have done this better. I could have gone 20 minutes faster. I could have, you know, like hiring me would mean that you would reduce the errors that you would make. Like you would
Hmm.
learn faster because like I would help you prevent all of those errors that you're likely to make on your own. And then I told him the other thing. I'm like, your other option of just you could wing it in training and just do what you feel like doing every day and like exercise as much as you can and go into that 70.3 and you'll finish and be okay. Like the next step up from that would be like buy a book on like what triathlon training optimally looks like. There's a program in the back of the book that's probably like 16 weeks to your first half Ironman, right? And like you could look at that to get an idea of what you should be doing. You could follow it to the best of your ability. You're unlikely to follow it perfectly because life will get in the way and you don't have any accountability on that. Nobody actually cares if you follow that or not. And halfway through, you'll realize that, or 2 weeks in, you'll
Hmm.
realize that like it actually doesn't matter if you follow it or not, you know. And then when you
Hmm.
get off, you won't have anybody to ask questions of about like how do I manage now that I have, you know,
Hmm.
I didn't I traveled last week, so I didn't do any of that. Do I make up those workouts or do I, you know, like how do I resume?
Hmm.
And so I was like, if you hired me, like all of that would go away and I would just be watching what you're doing every week. No, like trying
And
to progress
tweaking.
you from where you are, to where
Hmm.
you want to be, taking into account exactly where you are by looking at your heart rate and your pace and like how those mesh together, what your durability looks like, what your life looks like, what your motivation looks like, and then I'm
Hmm.
tweaking it from there. And so like, you and I have talked about this, but I'm like, I write programs like once a week for 1 week at a time, which in and of itself might be too much, but it tends to work reasonably well. Sometimes I modify the week in the middle of the week, but it's really rare that I ever write 2 weeks out because it's just like things come up every single week in like the regular
Right.
athlete's life.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. So I have had some experience, and I think we've talked about, yeah, how I've coached and who I've coached under, and we have, I've continued this trend. Although this next year I am not anymore, I'm done. But I offered tiers, right? And tiers being tier one was like I do a week schedule, even though I actually believe the best schedules are 1 to 3 days in advance, but a lot of people do need a week, and I understand that. So, okay, we'll do a week. And I'm the same way. If I'm coaching you at a high level, tier one or whatever, like I'm in there every day and I might be tweaking every day, right? And I might be pulling sessions and swapping sessions in based on how the athlete's performing and recovering, and as their life changes, right? Like I do also build schedules around their lives. Like if they tell me they can't swim on Thursday, I'm not going to have them swim on Thursday, whatever it might be. Got to, the group rides on Tuesday, Thursday, whatever. We try to, I work around as much as possible what they've got going on. And then I've also offered, tier two and tier three. Tier two was a 2 week schedule. Tier three was a month schedule, or like 4 to 5 weeks, I think. And I have soft data on this. The soft data, it means I don't have it like quantitative, but for, whatever, 15 years of doing this, I would say for just general compliance, like getting the sessions in, a weekly schedule, like I'm going to put it at like 70 to 80% compliance. 2 week schedule, probably somewhere in the like 50 to 70 range,
Mm-hmm.
right? Month schedule goes down to like, I mean, less than 50% of the sessions get done, less than 50%. I have experimented with doing like 12 performance, I call them like performance plans. Those went down even further to like 20 to 30%. So I imagine that stock plans, and I know some people will say, oh, I do really well in stock plans. Okay, that's great. You are probably an exception to the rule,
Yeah.
because a lot of people, unfortunately, and I'm in that boat. I put myself in that boat. I know what I
I'm
should be
horrible.
doing,
I've bought stock
but I
plans
need
and I can't
accountability,
follow them at all.
like, yeah, I need accountability. If I'm going to do something, I'd probably hire you, Michelle, right, to look over my shoulder and tell me, even if I'm doing a lot of like, I want to do this, you'd be like, okay, did you do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I still have athletes. And so I need to write a Substack on this, right? Like my soft data. And I don't have hard stats on this because it's been years and it's just but I feel pretty confident in those numbers, around like how often people are getting things done. So, and then the other thing is when I want an athlete to really be successful, so the time on my part is actually not less to do the month plan or the 2 week plan. I'm also in there all the time, right? Tweaking, even if they say they don't want me to, I cannot sit by and allow them to fail, right? Like, and I've tried to say, okay, well, they don't want to pay me as much as a
Yeah.
one, like, so I just have to let them. But I've had like the most beautiful plans be like completely shitified because that's life, right? Like they got injured, or I mean, and even though I always communicate with my longer plans, like if you get sick, please reach out, because you can't build fitness when you're sick. And do you know how many people, like not very many people do that, even though I tell them to do that. So then they're trying to like
Yeah.
jump back
You're
into
not alone
like,
in that. Like that's really common. I get
God,
the
like
same. Yeah.
really hard. So
And
at
even
least
with
one of
my
your
high
one
school
on,
swimmers, yeah, I'm
really,
trying to
they're
teach
just,
my
they
high
don't want
school
to,
swimmers to don't train when you're sick. I mean, there's a few that they're like the ones that like I don't want to say like they don't care as much, but I mean, there's level. There's people who are on the swim team like just for fun, and so like if they have a little sniffle, they'll be like, "I'm sick, I'm not coming."
right.
But then like my performance driven ones, like they'll come to practice sick.
And they're
Like,
totally
and
sick. And
one,
it's like,
I sent her home last week, and I think she was devastated and thinking I was punishing her. And I was like, I promise you, I am not punishing you. Like, I want you to swim as fast as you want to swim. Like, I am on your side, and I'm sending you
mm-hmm,
home right now because the right thing for you to do is rest. And you're not gonna improve if you're training in the state you're in. Like, you need to go
yeah,
home,
you
take
go,
a hot
go
bath,
rest.
go to bed, and rest, and don't even train tomorrow. And the thing is, she came back 2 days later. She was bright, she was smiling, she was
Yeah, of
happy,
course.
she was
Ready to
like,
go
and everything
again.
was better. And I'm
Yeah.
like, So, and then when I saw her face, I'm like, there you go. Like, I promise you, like, because I felt bad. I think she like left in tears thinking that like I was
Oh,
punishing her. And I'm like, I did not
but
kick you out
it's,
of
I
practice.
know.
She was like, really? Are you kicking me out? I'm like, no, I want you to go home and rest because I want you to be able to like do this well. So like, again, like that's our don't train when you're sick.
Don't train your sick. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I've had athletes that have been on my like weekly plans that are like, well, I'd like to see the plan further out. Right. And I'm like, well, that's actually, and I'm entertaining this idea. I'm like, okay, why do we need, and most of them say, it's not that I don't trust you. Right. But it's like this compulsion of needing to control. And if I know I just do this, then I'm going to get better. I'm going to whatever. And even like the best coaches don't, I mean, you remember Chucky V, right? I think he wrote a whole like several blogs about like why he doesn't write stock plans and why he doesn't plan more than a few days in advance, right? Like this is an elite level coach, very knowledgeable. Like, I mean, I learned a ton from him. And it's just, these longer plans are just like, rough sketches at best, right? I
Well,
mean,
it's more like I think that the longer plan is assuming that you have an ideal life.
exactly.
Right. So, I mean, like, I could
Right.
write, oh my God, do you want me to write out a
Beautiful.
perfect 6 month
Right.
plan for you?
Right.
Like, I can write the perfect 6 month plan of, like, here's how
Right.
it's going to progress from week to week, and we're going to add, and here's where you're going to rest, and then here's where your key sessions are going to be. I mean, we could
Right.
write
And
all
it's going
that
to be
out. And, like,
beautiful.
the problem is that nobody's life matches the ability
Right.
to follow
Do
through
that.
on that perfect plan. And so, like, that's why, because your life isn't going to be matching that ever.
Right.
It
Right.
just doesn't.
So yeah, so and I've tried to explain this to my athletes. I'm still entertained. Like, okay, maybe if you want to see the plan farther out, I will charge you more. So it's because it's going to be more work on my part. I'm going to develop this beautiful plan, idealized plan that you're not going to follow. Then I'm going to have to manage your mind around it because you didn't, I'm going to have to go back in and tweak everything all the time. Oh, sure, if you want me to do that, but I'm going to charge you more because it's going to be more effort for my part. It's not that, and we've talked about this too. It's not that, especially for athletes that have big A races, right, that they're training for. Like I will have sessions in there that are hidden that I have kind of laid out, like
Mm-hmm.
what I think that I'm going to have them do. I would say only 50% of the time do I actually even stick to that because how they have progressed, how they have recovered, how they have fueled, right, all those things have gone into it, and they actually didn't, right, and so why even put that on the schedule as like what you have to do to be ready? It's like you might be, maybe if you take care of yourself and you don't get sick and you manage your life and stress and all that, or we just accept where we are. We work hard every day, we recover as best as we can, and we do it again. That's all it
Mm-hmm.
is, right? Like stacking the
I will
days
say,
and
yeah, I do pencil in for myself, especially when there's like a big race and it's long and it's like I need to remember, you know what I mean? Like if they're
right,
running
right,
marathons or Ironmans, I'm like, where do I will like pencil in like 20 miles, like where I think those should be, like where the big rides should be, and I'll kind of pencil them in, but I won't write any details of like what that
right,
session is
right.
actually going to look
Looks
like.
like,
But it's more, honestly, that's more to remind me that like, because I'll start looking ahead and be like, oh, there's a 20 miler, like because half the time like what we're doing as coaches is we're writing the plan so that the athlete will be capable of doing the kind of training that is the most specific training for the event, right? So
right,
like in my world, in my head, in this ideal sort of plan is that like sort of from 3 to 7 weeks out, like those 4 weeks there should in theory in the ideal world be like a pretty solid focused block that is like that has some sessions on there that will make the athlete go, oh my God, what
hmm,
she wants me to do, what? But it's like in order to do those, right, then it's like,
you
well,
have to
then we
do
back
it,
up
yeah,
from that, and it's like, well, you have to be able to do something, that builds to your ability
hmm,
to not just do those workouts but to recover from them, right? Because like we don't want that workout to be so hard that it kicked your ass so much that like you then can't recover in order to like keep training. And so it's like half the time in the beginning what we're doing is we're training to train,
hmm,
right? We're like
hmm,
you're building up your durability so that you can then do the most key specific sessions and then recover from those, and then you show up on race day and boom, you're like, I felt great. Like that's your
yeah,
ideal world. And so there are
yeah,
times where like I'll be sketching in for myself just to make sure that we don't run out of
mm,
time
right, right,
if we have any, like if I have any ability to control that, right? Because
right,
if and
right.
when the athlete gets sick for 10 days, right?
Right.
And like,
Then we're,
okay, that's going to like set everything back. And so, like, if you've been sick for 10 days, what you're not going to do is then jump into that like big key, like really challenging session, because like it's likely you're likely to fail it and not do it well, or if you can do it, you're unlikely to be able to recover from it and may relapse into more sickness, or like you just didn't benefit from that session the way that you would have had you had more of the training leading into it. So
yeah,
that's
it's,
it's when we're only writing week to week, it's not because we don't know what you should be doing. It's largely that, like, if you think that like that's a session that had to be done 3 weeks out, but something came up 4 weeks out, and then we changed our mind and thought that's actually, like, in an ideal world that's what you should be doing, but this isn't the ideal world, this is the
mhm.
real world, then we're going to change it instead. And then if you're like, oh, my coach doesn't believe in me anymore because like she cut the session in half that like I was supposed to do, and like that's what you were talking about when you're like, we're
Yeah,
going to manage your
managing.
mind around this,
Yeah.
because like if they thought they were going to do this big session, they were like, why are you treating me with
Yeah.
kid
And then
gloves? But we're like,
I
well,
have to tell them, yeah. And I do feel that, we often fall into the trap, and I do it too, right? Of like the ideal. I mean, I'm always overly optimistic about the amount of time I have, right? In any day. I'm like, oh, I can get all that done. I can, from work to, and I think that kind of, it's similar for athletes that are looking to perform well or build fitness or whatever, right? They just, the vision they have for the future is ideal, instead of looking back and being like, well, how did it actually go for the next 6 weeks? And if it didn't go well for the last 6 weeks, right, or whatever time frame you want to look at, instead of thinking about, well, how can I change my you have to either change your reality, right? Like your day to day, what you've got going on. Maybe you got to kick the kids out of the house, right? I don't know. Because a lot of times it's like you can't, your kid's sick or you're, whatever. Like you can't plan for these things. But then I say that and like, well, maybe we should plan. Maybe it's like we don't know when you're going to get sick, but you're probably going to get sick. Like just, we need to take that. So if anything, it's like what I try to get athletes then to do is like, let's assume that, life is not ideal and it's not going to be as perfect as you envision it. So then what we have to do is kind of lengthen time that it's going to take you to get ready to do what you want to do. And that's also hard for people to wrap their heads around, I think. Because sometimes it doesn't align with like the race they want to do, right? Because this race is in 3 months and how am I going to get from A to B, right? And then my kid's going to get sick twice and I'm gonna have to go on work travel and whatever else, comes up. And so I do work with athletes sometimes to try to encourage them. Well, can we maybe do that race, but let's push the big goals down the line 6 months. Like if you want to break 4 hours in the marathon or you want to whatever, right? Like you try to be realistic. And I often feel like I'm being a little bit, I don't feel like I'm being negative because I do believe that almost anything is possible. It just depends on the length of time, right? In the circumstances that they're under, right? Like you can, like, for example, I have an athlete that wants to run between an 8 and 10 minute pace, who's currently not running. And we joked about this or we chatted, it's a pretty big difference between 8 and 10. But he can do that. I have no doubt in my mind that that's within the realm of capabilities, but it's going to take probably a year, right? Because he's currently not
mm-hmm.
running at all. And so we should not maybe anticipate this is going to happen in like 2 to 3. Maybe it will. We don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. I do find it hard, like when an athlete comes to me with goals that, and I actually am curious, like how you deal with this too. Like, so if an athlete comes to you and says, like I want to run a 3:45 marathon in 2 months, and you're
My
like
current
something
pace
that you're just
is
like that,
right. Like
and you're
that's like
looking at
no,
their
yeah.
files and like this is like really unlikely to happen. The way that
Yeah.
I try to be really careful with that, because I know that my words can have a really big impact for a really long time on an athlete, right? So like it matters what I say. And if I say like you can't do that, right? Like I mean
You're right. Oh yeah.
that could
That's not
potentially be absolutely devastating for an athlete, right? So like I'm not going to say you can't do that. What I will say instead is something along the lines of helping them think through, what will it take in order for you to accomplish that, right?
hmm
And just to
yeah.
get, so that I
Yeah.
know where their mind is at, like what do you think it takes in order to accomplish that? and then like kind of
Yeah.
see where they go with it. And if they're on track, I'll be like, okay, yep, that's what you need to do, right? So then like we'll just set about the process and like let's see how close we can get. In other cases when they don't know, then like I'll say like I remember a while back, and this is a really interesting, like it's a cool story. Like I had an athlete a while back. This is like a long, at least a decade ago, maybe more, 12 years ago. He said to me, I want to qualify for Kona. Like, this is the year I'm going to qualify for Kona. And, like, we know how hard it is. Like, I mean, 12 years ago it was hard. It's still hard. It's like, that's a really big goal. I mean, this guy was like, he's a decent athlete. He was a good athlete, but he wasn't like the best athlete. He was good. But,
Solid.
like, I was like,
But yeah.
it just felt like, this is a leap, right? It was a leap for him to do. And so I remember I was out riding bikes with him and I said, okay, so, like, here's what we know it's going to take like roughly in order for you to like qualify for Kona. Like you're going to need to swim about like an hour, maybe an hour 5, but like either way, in like 60 to 65 minutes, like you need to swim in that range and it has to not hurt you to do that. Right. So you're
Hmm.
going to have to develop your swim fitness so you can swim and hold that pace and have it not be hard. And then you're going to have to bike probably around like 5 hours, right? Because assuming like a flat course, right? And he was a good rider, but I was like, you're going to have to bike about 5 hours and you're going to have to do that with your average heart rate, probably like, in the 150s. He's kind of a young guy, So I'm like,
Hmm.
so like you need to be able to, in the power
Hmm.
that it's going to take, to ride that speed for 5 hours
Hmm.
with your heart rate in the 150s, like that's about the level that you're going to need to be at. And then you're going to get off and you're going to need to run, probably like a 3:30, maybe a 3:40 marathon gets you there. So we're talking, 8:15 pace. And your heart rate is going to have to be, again, holding maybe up to 160, but like in that range. And then you're going to need to learn how to fuel and you're going to blah, blah, right? But I gave him like those parameters because this was like
Hmm.
January, right? So it's kind of like, we have a long time. Like he wasn't saying like, I have 3 months to do
Now,
this. He
right.
was just like long term, like I want to do this. And so I was like, so those are the performance like benchmarks in training that we're looking for is like this power at that heart rate, this pace at that heart rate, and we will just keep chipping away at achieving that. And I will tell you, this is a really interesting like learning experience for me as a coach. It took him 2 years. He got there. He did it.
Yeah. That's
Like he
yeah.
didn't do it that year, but he did it the next
But the
year.
next, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it really was such a lesson to me that like as my first when he first told me like I want to qualify for Kona, in my mind he was so far off that it was
hmm
unlikely to happen. And
hmm
so I was like, I have to figure out how to like frame this for him. But
hmm
then when I framed it in that way and broke it down, he just, to his credit,
like chipped away at, yeah,
he chipped away at it and he got it. And it was like, I was so proud of that, that like, oh
yeah.
my God, you did
That's
that. Congrats.
I
Like
think
it was really,
I
really
think
cool. And it helped me open my
yeah,
mind about like what actually
yeah.
is possible when the athlete then embraces that and does work. It's one thing to say you're going to do it, and it's another thing to actually do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've used similar protocol, like, looking at previous races, race results, looking at that age group times and framing it in that way. And I think that works. I think for some athletes, the ones that are willing, I think, to look longer, right? Like they have,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know, I want to say, I want to seem ageist, right? But it's been my experience that younger athletes are more open and willing to be curious about like what is their potential. I think it's a lot harder with my athletes that are my age and older that I start to lay out this stuff and they're like, oh, I'm never going to get there. Right. Like I'm never gonna, that's beyond me. So I guess I should set a different goal. And that's sad to me. It's up to the individual. I'm not going to say yes or no. I just can say, well, it might take, we don't know what right now. This is where you are, and this is where you likely might need to be. I mean, you could get a roll down. You could get a day where people, like it's just a slower, whatever. Like we
Yeah.
can't control who shows up. We can't control the race conditions. We can't control lots of things. So, but I think in terms of being, they want this like control of like, this will happen. And I'm like, well, if you have to have that control, I mean, for women now, you have to win your age group. I mean, so pretty clear, right? I mean, unless
Yeah.
they make these changes coming up, whether they're talking, I don't know, I haven't been following what's been going on there, but you need to win your age group to be sure that you're going to get a Kona slot. And so there's data for that for different races. And so you kind of have a ballpark range of what that would look like. So I think that's great that you were able to lay it out for him and he worked towards it. And 2 years is not a long time, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, if you
Yeah.
told me, Mickey, you could qualify for Kona in 2 years, well, I don't know. I'd still have to want to do it again. Like,
Well, that I
yeah,
guess that's the whole point. Is just like
right,
you can have that information, and then as the athlete, what do you do with that information? Like, do you
right,
look at it as this overwhelming thing that I'm never going to get there, and
right.
therefore I'm not even going to try, or do I like put my head down then and start chipping away and getting closer, and like chipping away and getting closer is the way. The other thing that I feel like we should end this here soon.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to give like a sort of summary, I feel like in a big picture, like if we're looking at training philosophy or training, I don't know what's the word, like just strategy plans, how do we manage this?
Planning. Yeah.
In my opinion, and I don't even think it's my opinion, I mean, like science tells us this, you will almost never go wrong with legitimately easy base building type training, right? And in that scenario, where you're truly like zone one or zone two, however you're defining it based on like 3 zone or 5 zone model. But like if you're below LT1 in training, more is more. Like
Yep.
it is
Yep.
almost impossible to overdo volume if your intensity is sufficiently low, right? Like you may get bored out of your mind. Like that might be like the only like potential negative. But like you're unlikely to hurt yourself. You're unlikely to be excessively tired. You're unlikely to like really have any big problems by doing too much if it's legitimately easy, right? Most people don't have enough time in their life to actually do as much of that work as they need to. So just knowing that if you find yourself with some extra time, like it's holidays right now and you're like, if there's people off work and they're like, I want to like train more, that you'll almost never go wrong by putting in extra time at that really
Yeah.
easy
Absolutely
effort,
agree.
right? And then it's like on the other end of that, like training at every level is beneficial in some way, in some capacity, in some like for some specific purpose. It's like every training intensity has its benefit for you, right? And everyone all the time benefits from more easy volume.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then like some people sometimes benefit from like the top end stuff, right? Like the stuff that's like above threshold, red zone, zone 5
Hmm.
or zone 3, depending on which model you're using. In short bursts, you'll almost never go wrong, I think. Like if you're 30
Yeah.
seconds, 45 seconds, right? I feel like
Yeah.
that's also
Neuromuscular.
like
Yeah.
really, really reasonable to do and you're unlikely to hurt yourself. But once you start
Hmm.
getting into like, here's a workout that's actually focused on, committing time to those efforts, you're like, well, be more careful about like when you're planning that and like not too close to your race, especially if your race is an endurance based race where like you're not actually going to need like that top end stuff. Like you don't want to be doing VO2 max efforts in the 4 weeks
Right.
leading up to your race. Like that's just not the time to be doing that. But also like doing VO2 max workouts when you don't have an appropriate base so that you can
Hmm.
like repeat and recover from that
Benefit.
workout
Yeah.
also isn't appropriate.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where people probably make the biggest mistake of like say athletes or people who train on their own likely believe it too much in the power of a VO2 max type workout and they do it at inappropriate times too frequently or without enough adequate base behind them to recover from and therefore adapt to that workout, right? So like VO2 workouts, I feel like you should be careful with those and do them when your body is ready to do them and at a time of your season that it makes sense. Like and what that
Hmm.
time is a base is developed and the race is not in the next month and a half.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle there, right, is like when you would be like working on raising your ceiling. And then as far as like season planning, it's like, well, it depends on what type of athlete you are, right? If you're a performance
Right.
driven athlete and you care very much about the result at the end of a race, then like give yourself adequate time. Don't put tons of other races in between those. Hire a
Hmm.
coach to help get you there. Arrange your
Hmm.
life around it so that you can get the training in and recover from the training. Right. But if you're like a lifestyle, longevity based athlete and you like to participate in races because they're in your community and it's fun and these are your friends and you want to train with your friends, then like, you know what? Make sure you're eating enough and
That's,
sometimes
yeah.
go easier than you feel like you need to
Think.
go
Yeah.
and call it good.
Yep. It's, yeah. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
It will not fail you. Yeah. Totally agree. Well, happy holidays, Michelle. I think this was a good one. I guess this is our last one for 2025.
Yeah. Got to come
We
back in
will
2026 and nice.
2026.
See if the world is on fire.
I'm sure it still will be.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, happy holidays, and we will talk with you in the new year, Michelle.
Cool. Sounds good.
Over and out.
Bye.